Hello and welcome back to another episode of You Want to Do What with Dan and Julie. Today we have Mary-Ann Ochota on, who is an anthropologist and broadcaster. Hi Mary-Ann, how are you?
Hello, I'm very well, thank you. Thanks for having me on.
Our pleasure. So do you want to tell everyone a little about what you actually do?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I studied archaeology and anthropology at university, and now I mostly work in television, but I also write books, magazine articles, I host podcasts, and I guess that all falls under broadcaster. So now I'm an anthropologist and broadcaster.
Very cool. And what sort of made you go into anthropology itself?
So I think growing up, I always wanted to be a vet, actually, and then didn't much enjoy chemistry at GCSE and thought, oh God, vet science looks like it's got a lot of chemistry involved in it. Maybe I don't want to spend years and years and years studying chemistry and drug interactions and all that stuff. I actually just quite like animals. But that kind of put me on the back foot because I'd always had this vision of knowing what it was that I wanted to do. But around that time, must have been 14 or 15, I saw a TV documentary about these two mountaineering archaeologists who had climbed this mountain in South America called Mount Ampato, and they'd found or were excavating the site where a naturally mummified body was sort of starting to protrude out of the glacier, the frozen rock and ice up at the top of this mountain.
Wow.
And it was discovered that this was an Incan human sacrifice.
Oh my God, wow.
Yeah. And that was exactly my response. Oh my God, wow. Because I think that is the appropriate response. And this girl was 12 years old, and because of the techniques that they were able to use in order to investigate and kind of really forensically unpick what had happened and what the archaeological science was telling them, it revealed that she'd been a human sacrifice, that she'd been groomed for this, and they were bringing in sort of social history and the understanding that they already had of people from this period, and it was sort of just it was mind-blowing to me that you could have such breadth of different ways of approaching the world, that the idea that if you're 12-year-old or if you were 12, the very idea of being walked up to the top of a mountain by the high priests and then bonked on the head and offered up to the gods would be really a very excellent thing, rather than be a kind of strange child abuse / murder cult. That totally blew me away. And I've always grown up, my mum is Indian, my dad is Polish, and so I've always grown up having a sort of sense of other cultures in the world. And this is what I think sort of sealed the deal, because I thought, wow, hang on a minute, this is all the interesting things about being human and about interacting with the world and trying to understand the psychology and the science and making sense of it. So that's ultimately what led me to archaeology and anthropology. And then I think what led me into broadcasting rather than a career in academia or going off to use anthropology as a journalist or in international development, or I don't know, like going to be a banker or something, was that idea of wanting to share these stories with a wide public and making sometimes what is quite difficult or complicated science interesting and accessible. And the challenge is you don't need to dumb it down. You just need to approach it with clarity and enthusiasm and share why it is that you're interested, because it is really fascinating. Even stuff that might seem quite dull at first has the potential to capture people's imagination like you wouldn't believe.
And anthropology in itself, what is the actual sort of definition of anthropology? It's a part of archaeology and kind of history. What's the actual definition of it?
Oh, well, if you ask an anthropologist, they would say, no, it's totally separate from archaeology. And actually, archaeology and anthropology was only ever taught as kind of two sides. Oh, hang on. Let me go back. Anthropology is the study of people in the broadest sense. So there's in the UK, it's generally taught in two sides of the same coin. One is a biological anthropology, which is evolutionary processes, how we've diverged from other great apes like gorillas and chimpanzees. Things like environmental health and how disease changes people's evolutionary or humans' evolutionary processes. And then there's also social anthropology, which was the bit that I specialised in more, which is the study of culture and family relationships and connectedness. There's a lot of crossover with psychology, with philosophy, with sociology. But generally, anthropology doesn't sort of set up some kind of social experiment where you test people's responses to different faces in a laboratory, or you kind of set up some kind of unusual study in a kind of a student bar or something like that. It's generally based on ethnographic fieldwork where you go and live or spend a lot of time with the people that you're trying to understand and study, so that you're kind of walking in their shoes. So it's a kind of in-depth, qualitative approach to understanding your subject.
So it's not just looking at civilizations in the past, but also cultures today as well. Yeah,
so most anthropologists study sort of living cultures. But the reason that archaeology and anthropology were originally studied together is a kind of a colonial product of kind of Victorian attitudes to people from overseas, because inevitably you kind of had a white colonial explorer or a missionary, or someone from the East India Company wearing a pith helmet going off to study the savages, and they treated studying people from very different cultures and different ethnic backgrounds and different parts of the world in much the same way as they approached trying to categorize and understand the natural world. So there'd be people on an expedition who would be going off to kind of collect snakes, and other people going off to hunt tigers, and then there'd be some people going to study the strange savages who live in the forest. And thank God we've moved on from that. But the kind of the concept was that these were primitive peoples, and that they were using, for example, stone technologies. And so archaeology and anthropology came together because the idea was that white, inevitably Christian civilizations were more progressed, were more advanced. And so actually when you're looking at people who live in very different ways, it's more akin to studying people from the European past. So the people who built Stonehenge might be equivalent to the people who currently live in Patagonia. Again, it's just not true. I think A, it's clearly not true, and B, I think the thinking has moved on hugely and profoundly, so that we're not now looking at other cultures and sort of saying, look, there's a discrete thing that you can study and put in a glass case in a museum and write about because we know better than they know. But also you're not saying these people are stuck in the past, look at their primitive backward ways, so we can compare them. That's why they were kind of studied together. Now I think there is a slightly more progressive explanation and reason to study them together, which is that anthropology can actually inform our understanding of archaeology really well, because what you're actually doing is looking at the material culture of past cultures. So you're not just looking at science or kind of hard data that is separate and divorced from all the messy complexities of being human. People living in the Neolithic 5,000 years ago trying to build a chambered tomb in Somerset also read about children, and they also worried about what they were going to have for dinner, and they also worried about what happens when they die and all that stuff that we do now. So it's kind of sometimes I think quite useful. They don't necessarily think about them and worry about them in the same ways that we do, but it's always quite useful, I think, to sort of bring an anthropological eye to the past.
Speaking about that, obviously you were lucky enough to work on Time Team, which was one of my favourite shows growing up. I used to watch that all the time.
It was one of my favourite shows growing up too, and then I got to work on it, which was
must have been amazing,
so cool and weird. Yeah, it was
How did the anthropology sort of help you interpret what you found? And that must have been such a cool period of your career.
It was funny, actually, because so when I first graduated with a degree in archaeology and anthropology, having specialised in social anthropology, I didn't actually know what I did want to do with myself. It's only that I came to broadcasting and writing, I guess incrementally, realising that's what would suit me. So I didn't really know what I wanted to do, and spent a couple of years doing really random odd jobs. I worked in a bar, I worked in a shop, I was doing some modelling at the same time, partly just simply because that would mean that I could travel. Having not earned very much money, I still got to go to interesting places. But then my first TV job, my break, effectively, was presenting an archaeology documentary. So I kind of had to hurriedly go back and get all my textbooks and go, oh no, I do remember all this. I do remember it. And sort of put an archaeology head back on. And it's sort of only accident, really, that means that I've done a lot of archaeology on TV and written about archaeology now. Because of that first opportunity that sort of took me back to British prehistory. I've done a fair few bits of more anthropological programming as well, which I guess is sort of somewhere between travel meets sort of culture, social history stuff. But Time Team was fantastic because it meant that I got to spend a whole summer standing next to field archaeologists who are incredibly experienced at basically digging away at what I can see as mud and going, yes, can you see? And you're like, no, what is it that I'm seeing? And they're like, oh yes, and everyone's getting really excited, and I'm like, terribly sorry, but what are we all looking at?
I have to admit, when I was growing up and watching it, I always wanted them to find like an Indiana Jones type tomb or something, but it never quite happened.
I know, disappointing, isn't it?
Yeah.
But the thing that really blew my mind spending that summer on all these different sites was that it's an extraordinary combination of very meticulous, quite hard manual labour, and then these kind of leaps of intellectual, sort of gymnastics where people go, yes, this is just like blah, blah, blah site in, Rutland, which dated to 1240 because this pottery is just like that. And look, you can see from the fabric in the actual clay, the way it's been baked, the pattern on the side of it, this means this and blah, blah, blah. And if you put that together with this, and it was like watching a slightly more coherent Sherlock Holmes, like a whole team of detectives bringing together all these pieces of evidence and then like building a case that explained what it was that would mean all this evidence was where it was in the ground, and why some of it wasn't where you thought it might be, and why this definitely was, and therefore building it into what we already knew to sort of take the story one chapter forwards. And they literally really did do it all in 3 days. And then you do all the post-excavation analysis, which takes weeks and weeks afterwards, if not months, which you don't see on TV. But the actual excavation and the interpretations that Mick and Phil and Francis and Helen were doing in the field really did happen as they were filmed. Like, it wasn't put on for TV. That was just archaeologists being brilliant at their job.
So you've spoken a little bit about your degree. What sort of things did you do at university, and how has that translated out of it? I know obviously you jumped around jobs after.
Yeah, so I studied at Emmanuel College at Cambridge University. I went to a pretty ordinary state school in Cheshire. I didn't go to a posh school by any stretch of the imagination. Then I went to sixth form college and I studied maths and further maths. I don't really know why I did further maths. I know I'm not, that makes me sound like I'm good at maths, but I'm all right. I'm all right at maths. I thought, I just had a nice maths teacher and he went, you could do further maths. And I was like, oh, can I? And then like signed up for it and then was stuck with it. And it was a nightmare. Don't ever make me do pure 5 again. God, I didn't know what I was doing. But so I studied maths, psychology, and biology, because by that point I knew that I wanted to go to, particularly Cambridge. I'd kind of got into my mind that Cambridge was a place that I wanted to try and get into, and I wanted to study archaeology and anthropology. And so at uni, honestly, it was a bit of a shock to the system, I think, because I went to a sixth form college where a few of us went to Oxbridge or equivalent universities, but not that many people. And so I think for example, my form tutor was, I think, kind of proud of me, and you know, you'd walk into a class, and I always had the sense that I knew what I was doing in terms of my coursework. I could do all the reading, I understood and enjoyed the subjects. And then you go to university, and I know everybody's experiences are different, but you go to university, and so all of a sudden you're this like little fish in a very big pond, whereas I'd come from being a big fish in a little pond, and just sort of flapping around, not really feeling like I was being a bit rubbish and really, really average, I guess. But because you're in a funny bubble where you're suddenly at Cambridge University and everybody's really good, and your tutors don't necessarily know who you are, or your lecturers at least don't know who you are, and they don't really care who you are. That was the thing that I was like, oh, but I'm Mary-Ann. And they're like, and I've got a research seminar to do, and I've got a whole, funding proposal to, sort out, and I've got this graduate student, and they like, you just don't really count very much. And I remember, because you're studying archaeology, social anthropology, and biological anthropology, and they kind of have very different approaches and very different foundations in terms of the subject. And because you've not studied any of them before, you have to hit the ground running. And so these reading lists were massive. And I remember the social anthropology reading list, one of them was Das Kapital by Marx, and I was like, which bit of it am I supposed to read? Am I actually supposed to read the whole thing? And so I start, very earnest, and I can't understand a word of it because it's complex and it's, quite wordy. And I've got, 7 other books and an essay to write that week, as well as ideally going to the bar and, making some friends. And I don't know. I found it quite a sort of challenging experience. And I think, honestly, I'm 39 now. I think it took about 10 years after graduating for me to fully appreciate what it was that Cambridge gave me, which was actually the things that has served me really well in my career now, which is the ability to work out what bits are important for you to actually know, how to get to the heart of the question, and then to synthesize it all very quickly so that I could then, for example, now do an interview with someone about Marx. And I wouldn't necessarily know all the answers, but I know enough to ask the right questions and to make it make sense to my audience, who probably also don't know much about Marx. And I think that's the secret. That's one of the weird things that, particularly the way that Cambridge, and I think I'd assume Oxford as well, teach, because it's a funny, slightly old-fashioned way of doing things, where they sort of throw you in the deep end of the pool and go, off you go. And you go, and then you sort of splash about, and you do eventually find that you can swim.
And I suppose another question would be, what is an average day like for an anthropologist? And I suppose it's a bit of a two-ended question as well. What's an average day like for you being anthropologist and broadcaster? So it's a good question. It can be very varied. If you're a field anthropologist working in an academic circle, then you might spend, years of your life in the field, inverted commas, not necessarily always an actual field. That might be in a city, Chicago. It might be amongst tribal people in the Brazilian Amazon, whose most recent work was about jockeys at Newmarket. And then she literally learned to ride racehorses and worked as a groom in one of the racehorse stables in Newmarket in order to sort of get into the world, not a kind of faking it way, but genuinely just so that she was in the right place at the right time to have conversations and start to understand how
people saw the world. And then the next thing that she did was to try and understand betting and betting culture. And so she started to work at a bookies in North London. And she's, you know, this like very academically, like astonishingly bright academic with, you know, years and years of research experience. But she was sort of doing a pretty drudgy job working in a bookies in the sort of like the back end of the high street somewhere, because she wanted to learn what it was like to do that job and to be someone who was walking into a betting shop at the 10 minutes after it opened and then leaving, 5 minutes before it closed, and what life was like and what it all meant for those people. So my job is not like that. My job is much more eclectic, and I quite like that, because I don't think I've got the patience to spend 5 years studying one subject. So, for example, this week I had a book published.
Wow, congratulations.
Thank you. Called Secret Britain. And it brings together 75 different sites and artefacts from around Britain that are kind of mysterious, that are intriguing and puzzling. And even though we know quite a lot about them, we can't answer all the questions. So everything from Stonehenge to this amazing wooden icon thing called the Dagenham Idol, because it was found in Dagenham, which is of all the things to come out of Dagenham, a god no less, an Iron Age god. It's about Iron Age, is it Iron Age? No, it's Bronze Age, so it's from about 2200 BC. And it's made of Scots pine, and it's really bizarre. It hasn't got arms, although it probably did have arms originally, and it's got a strange hole, a circular hole at the crotch. So they don't know whether it used to have a sort of appendage that has fallen out, or whether it's some kind of fertility symbol, that it's a female goddess. Okay. All sorts of things. Anyway, so that book came out. So I've done some interviews. I've written some articles for national newspapers and for magazines. I'm working on an idea for a podcast for Audible, which is a bit more anthropological. And I'm also thinking about what the next book is that I might write. So I'm doing research and reading. Some of that is sort of more academic journals, but some of it is just cruising around on the internet, looking at ideas and looking at what other people have written about.
Is that the sort of way you want to take your career, looking at, writing and podcasts and information, that sort of way?
I don't really like writing very much. I find it a little bit, it says the woman who's just published her third book. I find it quite lonely and quite annoying, because you have to, a lot of it is just you sitting at your laptop, thinking and then working quite hard. Those ideas where kind of writers sit waiting for inspiration. Ask any writer and they'll probably go, no, that doesn't really happen very much at all. What you actually have to do is just put the hours in of like bashing out a crap first draft that is really rough, and it's just going back to the beginning and working through it again is the thing that actually finesses your thinking. It's the thing that finesses what it is that you want to say. So that all that kind of planning and then drafting, that's all the kind of paddling under the surface, and then actually it looks like you've magically written a book. And you go, no, there's a lot of hours of effort that have gone in behind the scenes. But I find, I really like, the thing that I really like about making radio documentaries and TV docs is that you work with a team, and inevitably you're working with other people who are trying to think creatively about what is the story, what kind of, what are the crucial pieces of information that we want to share, or the feelings that we want our audience to have, which means that they care about this story as much as we do. Now, whether that's children who are growing up in a slum in New Delhi who are trying to teaching each other how to read and write, because they see that literacy is the way to get out and to change their lives and their families' lives. Whether it's something like that, or whether it's something about, what was the point of Stonehenge. if you kind of just assume that people are interested in that, whether that's, kids living in poverty in India or whether that's a bunch of old stones in Wiltshire, you're not going to get very far, because people go, oh, well, you care, but I don't see why I do, on some level, greater or lesser extent. So you kind of have to, I like the challenge of working together, of working out how you share the information, how you make it interesting, and then how you do justice to your subjects. Either the people that you're interviewing or who've allowed you into their lives, or whether it's, the researcher's work that you're profiling.
I think there's a really sort of interesting theme that's come out of having these conversations with people so far, like yourself. And we had Dr. Chris Norton on, who's an Egyptologist, and sort of very academic subjects, both Egyptology, archaeology and anthropology, but yet you guys have all taken it and made it into sort of a communications-based sort of careers almost, and you're broadcasting and writing books and talking to people about it and getting people excited about it. And it's not necessarily what people think of when they think of these jobs. They think of academics, I think.
Yeah, I co-host a podcast for Wiley, who are the science publishers, and the podcast is called This Study Shows, and it's all about science communication. My co-host is an amazing scientist called Professor Danielle George, and she's based at the University of Manchester. She's a radio physicist.
Wow.
And yeah, it's really cool. She did explain her work to me once, and I got quite far in understanding it, but I'd let her explain it above me attempting to explain it. But the thing that we interview scientists and science journalists as well, and people who are trying to engage with either like fellow academics or fellow scientists or fellow researchers, or talk to the media, whether that's about the importance of vaccination, whether that's going to the deep south of America to do a roadshow about human evolution, whether that's kind of challenging racist attitudes in science that people haven't even realized necessarily that they have. They kind of go, oh, this is just what we do. And you go, well, hang on a minute, have you realized that all your research subjects are middle class white people? That might skew your results. You need to be challenging your own assumptions about who an average person is, inverted commas, average. But the thing that comes up again and again in that podcast is that even if you want to be a kind of like dyed in the wool, hardcore, hard science, I'm all about crunching the data, or fine tuning my laboratory instruments, or setting up this electron microscope, or whatever it is that you're doing. Ultimately, at some point, you will need to explain to someone else what it is that you're doing, whether that's a colleague, whether that's someone that you're trying to convince it's important because you want funding from them, or for many researchers, the funding that you're getting or the way that you're being paid by a university is through public money. And so I think there's a value in sort of appreciating that, even though it's sometimes difficult, and even though sometimes it feels like it's not your job to explain evolution to a bunch of people on BBC Two or on a podcast, or answer this annoying journalist's questions, actually the more that the public can be engaged in proper reputable research, the more they are invested in rejecting fake news, in turning to reliable sources of information, of trusting experts, of kind of saying, I'm invested in science. Science is an important thing to me because I think it's an important way for humanity to solve the problems that we're all facing. And so science should be well funded. Science should be protected from random, political decisions. That we should have, well funded universities. That talented kids should be able to get, move forwards and do good jobs in places where they can actually earn a living. So I think if you stop and think about it, we all do have a kind of a role to play in terms of sharing important stories about why we're doing what we're doing. Because ours is a knowledge economy. Most people aren't growing potatoes that feed us. And even if you are growing potatoes, part of your job is to explain why potatoes are good and why people should eat them and why they should care about the soil science and whether you're, dropping a bunch of possibly harmful fertilizers on them and killing the fish in the river, or whether you're not doing that and why you might not be doing that. So I think even if you're growing potatoes, your job is partly communication.
That's a really good point. Everybody actually in this day and age, especially with social media, can be, and probably to some extent should be, communicating what they do. Maybe.
And has a responsibility to communicate the truth.
Yeah, exactly. And I think also to engage in debate and to not sort of shout down people who disagree. One of the best pieces of advice I received over the past sort of 12, 18 months was go to your social media profiles and go and find people and follow them, people who you don't agree with. Now, these aren't people that would negatively affect your mental health. So if you worry about your body image, do not go and follow a bunch of influencers who are just going to make you feel crap about yourself. That's not what I mean. Who are going, wow, look, I just always look like this, because they don't, truth be told. But people who might disagree with you politically, people who might disagree with you in terms of the role of government or society, all that stuff.
I think that's a really good point, because I think people are more and more becoming more and more divided in their opinions. And if we can all just go, okay, let's start in the centre, and then if you're a little bit to the left, maybe follow people a little bit to the right. I'm not saying right wing or left wing, but just different opinions off from the centre that we can all sort of have better conversations.
And also,
with.
I think those on social media currently, the information that's out there is generally quite far to the left and right, and it is the stuff that is shouting, and it is better to have the people in the middle, who are probably just on either side of the fence, to talk to each other.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, read, follow, and go. Like if you've got a news website that's your homepage, or you subscribe to a kind of news website, go and subscribe to a news website or have your homepage as the other side of the fence, because it's just subtle things, but you'll catch yourself going, that's not true. And you go, well, hang on a minute, two things. How do you know? Because otherwise you're just, chatting into your own echo chamber. And two, it's probably quite useful for you to know what other people are thinking, even if it is simply in order for you to marshal your arguments, because you do disagree with them and you want to engage in a meaningful and fruitful conversation, not just shout at them or tell them they're idiots or ignore them. Because I think that is the risk of social media. It's dead easy to post something up and go, yeah, me, this. And all the shouty voices come to the front. But I think, all us reasonable folk, even if we don't agree with each other, we do need to keep talking.
I think that's a great point. But just going back to anthropology a little bit.
We could talk about that.
We could talk about that for hours.
Yeah, we could. Yeah, and we should.
What are some of the most interesting things that you've found in anthropology or you've been involved with?
So I think I've been incredibly fortunate to, particularly through TV, you almost get a kind of access all to places, to people inviting you into their lives. So I made a radio documentary for BBC Radio 4 about global sanitation. So the fact that basically 2.5 billion people, just under, people in the world do not have access to safe sanitation. So they don't have anywhere to do a poo that, bluntly, they don't have anywhere to do a poo that means that the poo will stay separate from their food and drinking water, which kills people by the million every year. And it's quite a simple...
about a third of the population.
Oh yeah, it's insane. It's extraordinary. And so we were making this documentary for the radio. And so we went to Bangladesh, to Dhaka, the capital city, and to a rural part of India. And it was amazing that I was able to go to communities that, as a tourist, as a sort of regular traveller, it would have been very, very difficult to access, and it would have felt somehow much less appropriate to be kind of wandering around a slum to kind of go, hello, I'd just like to have a look around. That doesn't seem quite as appropriate as being able to speak with people and interview them, and be in a situation where you are seeking information rather than sort of wandering around sort of in a privileged way. And that, you know, the following afternoon you'll go to see the wildlife park and all the other interesting local sites. It wasn't that. It felt much more collaborative, I guess. And that you have this amazing access. So there was this one woman who was telling us about what it had been like to grow up on a kind of a stilted sort of township. So these kind of shanty towns that are on stilts above what is basically just like a fetid pool of human waste and litter and drain water.
Oh my God.
Oh yeah, it was terrible. It was terrible. And she'd grown up near there, and now she had 2 little kids, and they said, oh, this is our toilet. And they showed me. And now I'm about 5'11" and I weigh about 80 kilos. So I'm not a small person. And and they said, oh, this is the toilet. And I was like, oh right, should I go up there to have a look at it? And it was this like little narrow, really really rickety walkway to this sort of cubicle at the end that was made of sort of planks and bits of old brushwood with a little cloth curtain. And it was basically just a shed with no base, so that when you went to the loo, you sort of hung on to the wooden frame, and you just dropped your business into the pool of water that was under everyone's houses. And I said, oh, should I go and have a look? And they're like, no, it's not strong enough for someone as big as you. And they were so worried that I would break their toilet, which I probably would have. And if I had broken their toilet, it would also have involved me falling into the pool of horrors. But they were saying every season when it rains, the rainy season, the water rises, and they're like, well, yeah, the old people die and some of the babies die, because the water rises up so high that the water level is above the floors of their houses, and so everything just gets covered in filth. And if you're weaker or vulnerable or elderly or a tiny baby, it's very, very difficult to stay well. And if you get sick, you can't afford medical help. And it was so sobering and so humbling, but not in a kind of pity way, just because they were part of the solution. They were saying, look, this is what we need. This is how we are trying to improve things for ourselves. And I think that's where it feels like my role as an anthropologist, as a broadcaster, really comes into its own, because it was a proud moment for me to know that these folk who live in this community, who are just like me, but life has rolled a different roll of the dice for them, that I could do something useful and sort of amplify their story and their demands for change and their call for, firstly, us acknowledging the inequality and then actually doing something about it. So that felt good. That felt good, because you're approaching not in a kind of, oh, I'm a white savior person to come and fix your lives, but just as my role is just to help you tell your own story and get it out to a wider audience.
Wow. That sort of leads on to personality traits. I was going to ask, what sort of things do you see in yourself and those in the field around you? Obviously, that's quite a humbling story. So
I think you have to be quite nosy and like people. I don't think you can really do my job if you don't like talking to
study people without liking them.
Yeah. maybe think of a different job. But kind of genuinely, if I were on a bus, not that anyone's on a bus at the minute because of COVID, but sitting on a bus or a bus stop and someone starts chatting next to you, I wouldn't move. I would start chatting back to them. So I think you have to be that kind of person. You have to be open-minded, assume that you don't know all the answers and that you have a lot to learn. Although, I mean, constant interactions with people who live very different lives to you or approach the world in very different ways, that kind of does trigger humility a lot. I think, what else? I think you have to be able to think quite critically, because you're not just making stuff up. You have to assess the evidence. You have to work out what it is that you're being told and why someone might want to sort of share that kind of information or conceal this kind of information, or why they might answer in a particular way. So you kind of have to have some of that sort of critical faculty to assess evidence and to build together a kind of a base of evidence before you work out what story it is that is true, that is real, that is objective enough, that can be that is robust to scrutiny. So I guess that's a bit more journalistic, I suppose, or as well as sort of as a basis as a researcher. And then I think, this is probably true of many jobs. A sense of humour is always quite useful. Like, you can't take it too seriously. Sometimes people go, "Oh, you're a TV presenter. I mean, that must be so celeb and cool." And you kind of go, "Oh, I mean, it is. It is. I've had some kind of very cool celeb moments. I was really touched when my postman knocked on the door because he had a parcel to deliver, and he went, "I saw you on the telly at the weekend." And he looked really gobsmacked, because I'm normally just, that woman with the wild hair who trying to like control her dog from like jumping on him. And that was a really funny little moment because he'd seen me at work. But I think you can't let that go to your head. I mean, my job is definitely not as important or as serious as many other people's jobs. It's just a bit more high profile sometimes because I'm on the telly. Don't take yourself too seriously. That would be a terrible, terrible crime.
I guess the next sort of part of it is, what are the biggest positives and some of the best opportunities you've had out of your career so far? I mean, working on Time Team is amazing, and also you talked about the reporting on humanitarian sort of areas, but what are some of the biggest positives and opportunities for you?
Amazing opportunities to travel, and travel in a way that sort of gives you permission and access to people's lives, to the back rooms of museums, to helping the curator handle a particular artifact, all the stuff that is kind of, you get to go on the other side of the no entry sign. That's all pretty cool. Being able to work with creative, very intelligent people who are also invested in the project. So that sort of collaborative teamwork, being able to work on projects that matter, whether that's better science communication, whether that's hosting a conference for business leaders about achieving net zero carbon emissions, whether that's sort of sharing a piece of heritage research where it means that maybe that project will get funding so that they can protect that monument for another 1,000 years. So sort of doing work where you feel like you're making an impact, a positive change. And I think finally, every day being different. I don't think I'd do very well if I had a job where a lot of my job was doing the same kind of stuff with the same kind of people. So I really like the variety.
That's good. And on the other side of that, what are some of the less favourable aspects of the industry?
I think financially the uncertainty is quite difficult, and that's true of freelancers. That's true of many people in the creative industries, and I think even more so, obviously, tackling COVID and possibly the impact of Brexit and the international economic downturn. I mean, like, things are going to be tough for a lot of people, I think, coming up. So I mean, now I've been doing this job now for 17 years, no, 15, 16 years. And I only just in the past couple of years have I felt a little bit more secure that I don't need to worry because work will come along. It might not be quite what I expect. I don't necessarily know what I'm going to be doing next month, but I know that I'll get enough bits and bobs of work that it'll keep the kind of the balls rolling. For the first 10 years of my career, I got that first job co-presenting a documentary on BBC4 about Silbury Hill, which is this amazing prehistoric mound in Wiltshire, with Neil Oliver. And I thought,
wow, how cool.
Yeah, it was really cool. It was really super cool. And I was like, wow, I've made it. That was easy. Hey, check me. It didn't work in TV for the next 6 months because I had lots of meetings and I was developing ideas and I was kind of, getting dressed up, really enthusiastic, ready, doing all my research. And then it's not that I didn't get the job, it's just that people were having lots of conversations going, oh yeah, we could pitch this idea. Maybe, let's see, we've got a meeting with the commissioner at Channel 4 next month, so we'll let you know after that. And then a month later they say, oh, we didn't get a chance to get round to talking about that idea because we were talking about a different idea, but we're going to see them again in 2 months' time, so we could, and I'll drop them an email about it. And then things either do or don't get going, I was kind of literally sitting at home on my sofa just going, I've made the worst mistake of my life. I don't know what I'm doing. How am I going to pay the bills? What do I do now? And sort of, you've got to do a lot of hustling. You've got to believe in yourself a lot. And it's quite attritional. You've got to it's like last man standing. I think there were probably other people who would have been very good archaeology, anthropology presenters who just at the point where you still haven't been on holiday and you can't afford new clothes and you're going to walk rather than get the bus because that'll save you a bit of money, and you meet your mates for dinner and they've all got fancy jobs or what have you, and you eat before you go out and then just have a starter. It's that level of just being careful with your money. I mean that it does get a bit wearing, it's got to be said. And I was very lucky that I was living with my boyfriend, who's now my husband, so that he had a kind of more steady income, so that I knew that the rent was going to get paid each month at least. So I think that's the most difficult thing for me, just worrying about money and kind of working out whether you haven't got any certainty, you don't get all the employee benefits, I haven't got a pension, stuff like that, boring but important stuff.
We like to talk about sort of salary expectations and average incomes. Now, broadcasting, as you said, what you're doing at the moment can be very unpredictable, but anthropology in itself, we look for some average figures, and it's sort of saying around 30,000 would be an average income for an anthropologist. Does that sound right to you?
It's a good question. I was thinking about this because I knew you were going to ask me about it, and I thought to myself, I don't actually know, because if you were based in the field overseas, it's very, very possible that you would not be, like, your salary would be pretty low. You might have a research grant that would cover your living costs.
Yeah, and they might give you board and food and things like that.
Yeah, exactly. Or you might be able to get a job where you're living as well as doing your research. Or you might have a grant that covers your living costs and pays you a kind of sort of small stipend from whatever institution that you're working at. If you're working in a kind of a development agency or a kind of a big charity doing research work or kind of any of their project work, then I guess that, yeah, I guess that's probably about right. Maybe a little more.
Okay, that's fair enough.
But then I don't know. I mean, if you're a Cambridge academic, but you're actually spending the next 2 years working in a bookies, you're not earning 30 grand a year. Yeah. So I don't know. I've had years where I've earned very, very little money, and just kind of, well, basically relied on my boyfriend and a wing and a prayer and eaten into my savings. And then I've had years where I've gone, oh, that's okay. Whew, I can buy presents. Famous people get loads of money for doing TV like famous TV presenters get, I don't know, $2,000 a day for all their filming days. I don't get that. Famous enough for that.
What would be something that's not in the job description that you maybe have to deal with every now and then?
Ooh. I think doing jobs that you don't, this is a dangerous thing to say in public, doing jobs that you don't necessarily know anything about, but you go, yes, I can do that, and then you work your arse off doing the research so that when you do turn up to the job, you do know what you're asking and you do know what the answer is going to be. So I've done work for sort of more corporate jobs, really, slightly more journalistic jobs, where I interviewed someone about pension protection, and I was like, I have no idea. I have absolutely no idea about the financial instruments that protect people's pension funds. But by the time that I was interviewing that chap at 11 a.m. on Tuesday, I did know. So I think generally the thing that is most surprising is you'd be surprised what you can teach yourself in 24 hours if you really put your mind to it.
How does somebody really begin to progress within the world of anthropology and broadcasting?
Talk to a lot of people. Always be polite. The thing that looks like being a lucky break is actually you putting in the hard work, doing the research and the homework, and then sort of being in the right place at the right time, and then having the chops to say, yeah, I can do that, and then actually being able to deliver. So what looks like good luck is actually hard work behind the scenes. And I guess being a little bit flexible, if you know exactly what you're aiming for, then you can build your networks and build your contacts, potentially set up internships or kind of short-term work projects that will help you make those contacts and get that experience. And that's not brown nosing, that is just like learning from the right people and enabling them to see the skills that you could bring to the party.
Okay. And would you still go into the industry knowing what you know now?
Yeah. I think because it's not obvious. There's no one route in. It's not like being a lawyer that you do this, that,
Yeah.
and then you do those exams, and then you do this kind of placement, and then you've got a job. It's not that. So you kind of have to think flexibly, I think, and always look for the opportunities, whether that's maybe working for free for a voluntary organisation or charity or a community project, whether that's just extending your skill base, whether that's writing, whether that's like taking better photos, editing little videos, stuff like that, so that you can bring more skills to the party. That's definitely the way to go. And I think that's probably true of actually lots of jobs now, because it's that flexibility, it's that skill set that you can transfer that is probably relevant for so many jobs in our economy looking forwards from 2020 onwards.
Well, thank you so much for coming on, Mary-Ann. I've really enjoyed chatting to you. It's something I knew very little about, but it's been really interesting.
Oh, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Where can people find you on social media and your book?
Okay, so on social media, on Instagram and Twitter, I am at Mary-Ann Ochota. That's MaryAnnOchota. And my website is maryannochota.com, where you can find out what I've been up to, see some videos, photos, and order that book that I've just written.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for coming on.
Welcome.
Thanks, Mary-Ann. Goodbye.
Nice one. Cheers. Thanks, guys.